You know, I'm in love with the cinematic medium. I really, really am. However, something terrible is happening to our beautiful seventh art. I recently saw this interview with Curry Barker, the director of the film Obsession, which I still haven't seen, where he was talking about how proud he is that his film is shot entirely or mostly in medium close-ups or, you know, just shots with center framing and, you know, shallow depth of field. And, you know, he thought this was like a cool, you know, artistic choice. And my first reaction to hearing this was, why are you proud of this? This is something you should be deeply embarrassed about. Because guess what? Everything coming out now is being shot this way. Okay, there's exceptions, sure. But Christopher Nolan's Odyssey film is shot this way. Almost every indie horror film is shot this way. Superhero films are shot this way. Everything's shot this way. This is what I would call the new international style. And I call it that because, like, in architecture, you know, you used to have, back in the day, different styles of architecture for different places. You know, every city or even every neighborhood within a city had a different feeling, a different type of materials that were used, different philosophies of construction and different methods. Nowadays, everything looks the same. It's an international style. And it's obviously not just international, like, oh, isn't it great? We're all friends. We're all working together. No, it's international in the sense that it's large multinational corporations whose goal is to make money and reduce costs, who are deciding how things are going to look on this planet, okay? The aesthetics of our entire planet are being determined by these business interests. And the same thing is happening to our art forms. And to me, this exact thing that Curry Barker described is the international style of cinema. I haven't even opened my notes yet. Sorry, I got a little excited there right off the bat. Came in strong. Because I care. I care about that. I genuinely do. Like, this is our art form. This is what we have. You know, what's the point of life if we don't make beautiful things? What is the point of getting our GDP up? What is the point of having a successful civilization if it's not to make the world beautiful? I'm serious! Okay, I'm bringing it. I'm gonna meditate. I'll be right back. Opening my notes. My notes suck for this video. I've stopped writing scripts for my video. I used to write them and rewrite them and edit them. And here are my notes. It says mise-en-scène. That's the subject. We'll get to that. Then it says Nolan fuck IMAX. Oh yes, okay. So IMAX, Christopher Nolan's Odyssey film. This is supposed to be this big, lavish production, huge art department, massive sets and props and period clothing and action set pieces and all these things that would make you think this is like a Lawrence of Arabia or something like that. But instead, apart from, you know, there's some, you know, wider shots, which I think are the best part. But apart from those, so much of this film is shot in mediums and medium close-ups. Essentially, the problem is that there's no real emphasis and care and deliberation when it comes to creating evocative compositions. A scene is more likely to be broken up into shot reverse shot than it is to be properly put into a scene. Put into scene, okay? That the French, it sounds way better. It's mise-en-scène. This is what cinema today is lacking. Mise-en-scène. Okay, if you don't know this term, listen up, because this term was not mentioned one fucking time when I went through film school. 3 years I went there. Not one time was this term used, mise-en-scène. Here's my question for you. What does a director do? A producer takes responsibility for the film actually getting made. But what does a director do? They take responsibility for the vision, the overall artistic vision of the film. So they're involved in every single artistic decision. So it's hard to summarize what they actually do, right? They do a lot of things. They're going to be there for casting, and they're going to be doing rehearsals, and they're going to coach the writer for rewrites, and they're just going to mold the material until it has a unified vision, right? But when you're actually on set, on the day you're shooting your movie, what does the director do? Yes, they're giving direction to the actors, right? They're working with the actors to find the true emotions of the scene and to get, you know, everything working right for the camera. You know, you need to make sure that the light is working well for the camera. Does the shot look good? Yeah, sure. But, you know, the actors are also going to focus on the acting, right? That's their job. The cinematographer in that, he has a whole department, right? He's going to have like hundreds, or she, sorry, or they have hundreds of people working for them to make the shot work, right? So the director's doing some of that, but like, what is the main thing to actually do all day long? Like, what is directing when you're on set? It's mise-en-scène.
I mean, if there's a reason why I have to have a shot over here when I'm planning to have a shot over there, because then I have the shot over there, then the scene's over.
He said, you know, we're going to start this shot with Jenna and John Finnegan, and it's going to be dark. They're going to come out of their dressing room and be in this dark area. I said, okay. And he said, but I'd like to pan when she goes down backstage behind the wall and be able to see them down there. Okay, but we're not finished, he said. Then I'd like to look through this bathroom and see on stage, and also, by the way, see the audience behind it. He says, oh, and don't forget, we're going to fly the walls for the scene change. He said, how long will it take? I said, oh, about an hour and a half. Okay. About 30 minutes later, he came to me and said, what the hell is taking so long?
It is when you decide what the shot is. Where does the camera go? When does it move? How does it relate to the blocking? Mise-en-scène is basically the word that we use to describe everything that happens in the camera up until editing. So it names that dance that happens between the camera, the actors, and their environment. Okay? So every camera movement, every movement of the actors, all of that is mise-en-scène. That's the dance, and that's the design of the film. Keep in mind, a film is not just what happens in front of a camera, it's how it happens in front of a camera.
How?
I would love to see a study that shows what percentage of films made in the last 20 years are with singles versus two shots, or versus more elaborate, wider shots with complex blocking. My assumption is obviously that the use of the single shot has become more and more dominant over time. And now the question might be why? Like, how did we get here? It might be easy to blame social media. You know, when I hear about Curry Barker's approach to shooting everything in singles, the first thing I think of is, oh, that would make it very easy to crop your movie Instagram Reels or for TikTok. If you compare this to the 1950s, when TV was becoming very popular in America, the Hollywood studios reacted by making films even more cinematic, by introducing widescreen and delivering an experience that you cannot get on TV. But nowadays it seems that we're going the exact opposite direction, where studios are actively seeking social media stars who employ social media techniques. We're capitulating to new media rather than fighting against it. However, I think the emergence of this new international style and social media are both symptoms of the same disease. And what is that disease? It's alienation. Now, you might think that these films are responding to the times in an interesting and insightful way. Maybe. I would argue that they're capitulating to alienation and deepening alienation. This is the aesthetics of alienation. This visual schema goes along with a thematic fascination with the personal, the individual, the psychological, the pathological, and a de-emphasis of class, of material reality, of the environment, and of history. To cast our minds back in time for a moment, in the immediate post-war era, in France, in Cahiers du Cinéma, which is a very famous journal, writers like André Bazin were talking about the use of deep focus and wider shots as not only an aesthetic mode, but as a moral and ethical mode. Keep in mind, after the war, people were sick of fascism. People were sick of propaganda. The promise of a deep focus, wider shot was that the audience has freedom to let their eyes roam. But it seems that filmmakers today are a little bit insecure that their audiences will miss the meaning of their film, or they might get distracted. But this is an incipient fascism, clinging to your eyeballs and your soul and telling you where to look. So if you take any film theory classes and you never hear from this French theorist named Alexandre Astruc, then you should approach your teacher and ask them why, because Alexandre Stuck, before Truffaut, before all of the other theories of auteur cinema and all this stuff, he was the original person to say it is the director, not the writer, who is the author of a film. And his very landmark way of putting it is the camera stylo. It's like the camera is the pen. What the pen is to the writer, the camera is to the director. And so his whole idea is that the design of the film, shot by shot, and how one shot leads to the next, that's the main territory of a director's creative work. That's what their labor, that's the main part of what their labor is to decide what the mise-en-scène is. And people, the reason I am so fired up today is because directors are not doing their job today. There is no mise-en-scène in contemporary Hollywood filmmaking. Period. If it's just about collecting coverage, okay? And if you go to film school, you're gonna hear coverage. If you're just doing coverage, you don't need a director. You actually don't need a director, right? The cinematographer can just decide on their own where does the light look best. That's where the actors go. And then we just, we'll get a master. We'll go in for a medium here, a medium there, a close-up there, a close-up there. Boom, we're done the scene. No blocking necessary. We don't need to have them interacting with their environment. We don't need any elaborate camera movements. We just collect coverage, right? This is the mindset you get at film school, and this is the mindset that most working directors have today.
Ridley uses like 10 cameras.
This used to be the mindset just for TV directors, because you're fighting to make your days. You have a lot of pages you have to shoot every day, so you're trying to get through things quickly, and you usually don't have the budget to do anything too elaborate or take your time. So you just fire it off. You just, boom, 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 you shoot it and you get out of there. But not even all old TV shows work this way. I mean, like a great TV show like Law and Order, back in the day, they were cooking people. Look at the mise-en-scène in these shots. They knew how to get it all in one shot. The actors were hitting their marks. They were doing this beautifully orchestrated dance with the camera. The camera knew when to move. You were getting it all there in one shot. It was so elegant. It was so effortless. If you're not even looking for it, you won't pay attention because it's serving the story, right? And good mise-en-scène does that. It serves the story. And the job of the director is being conceived of as it's like a craftsman whose job is to come in and just collect data for the editor and the color correctionist. And it's the same thing with the cinematographers, right? They're collecting data. They're no longer creating images. They're just collecting data that for the next 2 years, people who work in post-production can make decisions about, should our hat be green or red? Like, that shouldn't be a question. That should already be decided, right? It's in the shot. The director decided already. But now these decisions are being pushed further and further down. You're delaying the moment where you have to commit to something, and you're just collecting options. You're collecting something. We could do it here, we could do it there, we could do it over here, we could do it over here. And you see movies now, like in Sinners, you see the scene and you get so many different angles of the same thing.
You should have your appropriate pieces of coverage, but to overshoot is to, in my opinion, not have a point of view.
Pick your shot, okay? When you change to the next shot, it should be deliberate and meaningful, hopefully. If not, just stay in the same shot. If you think back to the history of cinema and the origins of things with people like D.W. Griffith, who's a total racist and we hate him, sure, but he also helped innovate film grammar in such a massive way that you really do need to educate yourself and see how much we figured out in those early days. In a very short number of years, so much of film language that we still use today was discovered or invented, however you want to look at it. But D.W. Griffith was so economical with camera placement. There'd be one placement for the scene, and maybe you cut to a second shot or whatever, but then later on down the road, like halfway through the movie, you'd come back to this location again, and he would use the exact same shot. So he'd set his camera up once, he'd get that scene, then he'd do another scene there with the same camera placement. It was like you were minimizing the number of setups you needed to do. And there's economic reasons to do that, because changing the camera setup is what takes so much time on a film set. But more than that, there's a creative reason to do this, right? Because now all of a sudden, these different moments in the film start to resonate with each other and echo. And all of a sudden you're going, this scene and that scene, they're speaking to each other. And you're opening up all these aesthetic possibilities that are not there if you're constantly cutting to different new shots. Now, okay, I'm not trying to be too limiting. I know that there's creative potentials for breaking all kinds of rules and doing things differently. Like one of my favorite filmmakers ever is Terrence Malick, for example, and his camera's constantly moving. It's usually handheld, maybe Steadicam sometimes, and it is just this flowing river of movement. I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm saying there's an art to that as well. What I am saying is you don't want to have a lack of deliberation and a lack of mise-en-scène, okay? Because this is the thing, even when the camera's moving all the time, the actors are moving too, and the camera's responding to them and to their environment. That's mise-en-scène. What you have here is a kind of like improvised, highly dynamic mise-en-scène. That's not what's happening in the Sinners example, where you just have a bunch of different shots for the same moment, where guess what, there's no blocking, they're just sitting in a car. I think maybe another piece of this puzzle is that we have a real emphasis on performance these days. You know, part of that is economic because actors now really run the industry. This is the period of the actor-producer. To get a film financed, you have to have a name actor attached to it. There's no two ways around it. You just have to. Otherwise, nothing can get funding. That's just the way it is. And so because we're so focused on the actor, and we have this very, I'll say Cartesian concept of acting, where acting is from the neck up. This is where acting happens, right? And maybe the voice has something to do with it. But people, acting is your whole body, okay? Acting is your immersion in the world around you, okay? It is your interaction with the world around you, okay? And you can be surprised. Acting is reacting. And when you're just, your whole world is right here, there's not much to react to. And we have like this love with shallow depth of field, okay? And oh, so, wait, I started talking about IMAX before. So the reason I hate IMAX so much is not just because they're cumbersome and they're loud and crazy expensive, and they can only hold, like their reels only hold about 2.5 minutes. So you could never get a take, a shot that's more than 2.5 minutes long. So that really limits the length of the shots that you're going to go for. But that's all secondary. For me, the main problem is focal length. If you look up on YouTube, you'll find like how to make a shot look cinematic. If you search that, you'll find basically every single video will say shallow depth of field is one of the key ways to do that. Now, this shot you're looking at does not have shallow depth of field. Everything behind me is more or less in focus. It's not super sharp because this is not a very high resolution camera, but it's not blurry, right? You can see it. Shallow depth of field isolates the subject from the environment, right? So again, it's about like isolating the figure from the backdrop, and that limits the actor's ability to interact with their environment, and thus it limits the potentials for the mise-en-scène. The way to think about lenses, it's really simple. Just put your arms out in front of you, right? A longer lens is narrower. It sees, that's what it sees, right? A wider lens sees all this, right? But they're both landing on the same sensor, the same film strip, right? So whether you're like this or whether you're like this, it's gonna end up in the same size. But the IMAX camera, the sensor is so much bigger, right? So what does that mean? Because it's so much bigger, it actually changes the focal length. So a long lens that sees like this on a normal camera, because the IMAX sensor is so much bigger, it's actually going to be like, whoo, see all this. So if you want to get that other shot, you have to get an even longer lens to bring it back to this. But guess what? If you go on that even longer lens, then the depth of field gets even shallower. So IMAX is predisposing us even further towards shallow depth of field, and it sucks. You know, my hero, Orson Welles, there's stories about him on sets where he would know exactly what the film was. He would know exactly how he was going to cut everything together going in, right? Because he's an actual director and has a vision for what the movie should be. And so he would just shoot just as much as he needed from every scene, from every setup. If, you know, there's this shot, but he knows he's only going to use, you know, just that one moment in the scene from here. So we just shoot that one moment. Nowadays, the way it works is like, no, you get the whole scene from there. Let's run the whole scene through there. And then over here, and then over there, and then over there, and you do the whole scene from all these places because you're collecting data. But this makes it even harder to make your days, right? Because it takes so long to do it that way. You don't have time to get dreamy, like David Lynch was saying.
This is absolutely horrible. We never get any extra shots. We never get any time to experiment. We never get to, you know, go dreamy or anything. We barely fucking make our days. I could have spent a week in the fireman's. I love that place. And dream up all kinds of stuff. You know, that it's sick, this kind of fucking way to do it. You don't get a chance to sink into anything.
And there's a plague of mediums and singles, or like medium close-ups even. We're just swarmed with these. But you can't use the expressive power of your medium if all you're doing is shooting singles, okay? And now the rest of this video, I really just want to show you some examples of what you can do with really smart mise-en-scène and how it can help you tell the story visually. So we start in this fairly wide shot. Two characters are speaking. We don't cut into mediums. He's buying books. He hears someone he knows, so he runs. He doesn't want to be seen buying books. Character moves into frame, camera moves with him. Another character enters the frame here. Okay, now we stay wide here. Let them have their conversation, walking slowly. No need to cut this up into mediums or close-ups, you know? Look at this. Something in the background motivates the camera to move. It's just part of the environment. Same shot continues. Now we're behind the characters. And then the same character from the beginning of the shot returns, playing it cool. What's he doing? He's on his way back to buy those books that he was doing at the start. But he goes out of frame.
تیرگی که افت بر اهریمنانش باد افسار اسپان ما را در کف داشت و هر جا که خواست میکشید
بر اهریمن بدسگال نفرین 2 بار 3 بار 30 بار 1000 بار
بر تیرگی این بامداد که گیتی چون پر زاغی تاری روشن بود.
Now, I could choose a lot of examples of like action scenes and stuff that are done in these beautiful moving camera shots, but that's too easy. I'm trying to find scenes that are more like conversation scenes, because that's usually where the shot reverse shot, just standard medium close-ups, comes into play. But what I want to show you is that even in that kind of scene where people are just sitting down to talk, you can still shoot it with some beautiful mise-en-scène.
You couldn't do that if you tried. Of course, artillery would make an enormous difference. What artillery support can you give me?
Well, I'll see.
What about replacements?
We'll see what we can do, but I feel sure that you can get along with what you have.
Why just do it?
Oh, Paul, I knew that I was right to come to you.
All right. So what is this boat thing?
Look at how one character is cornering the other character within the frame. I mean, like within the frame, one character is cornering the other.
How do you get off sitting on Gil's car, man? Sorry. It's really not much of a scratch. I don't think it's even... Ain't the size that's in question here.
In this shot from Seven Samurai, it's like this threat. These bandits are rising up towards the village in the distance, who they're going to attack. Of course, there's this really famous scene in Citizen Kane. If you take a film class, of course, they're going to show you this scene. But the reason why is because it's such a powerful example of mise-en-scène, where little baby Kane, who's playing outside, is being inframed, right? His whole world is being inframed by the adults around him. Now, there's two different sides of the debate about what they should do with little Kane, and they're on two different sides of Kane himself within the frame. So you can see how elegant and how effortless this mise-en-scène is communicating the thematic and the emotional meaning of the scene. Or in Bicycle Thieves, when the protagonist, whose bike has been stolen, right, he's trying to get his bike back, he's had enough and he's about to cross a line and steal someone else's bike. You literally have a line in the frame that he's going to cross. You can also just slow it down and hypnotize your audience a little bit, get into the headspace of the characters in the moment and the world. It can be way more immersive to get the camera existing in the same space and time, right? Because every time you cut, you're kind of jumping a little bit. You get a little jolt in the space and time. Directors should also not be afraid of decentering their subject. Most people would have stopped this camera push-in a little earlier to keep the character in the center of the frame, but instead we have this huge space on the left behind him, showing the villagers just living their lives, and they're in focus. You used to have to try very hard to keep everything in focus so that you can show these characters moving around, dancing around each other within that space. The character from the very back comes to the very front. And you get this conflict between them. I know sometimes, like this Ernst Lubitsch film, you'll see the camera is moving, there is blocking, right? However, the camera is moving in order to constantly reframe characters in the center of the frame in a sort of like, you know, whatever you'd call this, kind of like a medium or a medium wide. To me, that's not as interesting because the composition stays the same. It's like the characters are moving, but the camera's moving with them. So there's, you know, nothing really changes ultimately. There's a bit more life there, sure. And the characters are, you know, interacting with their environment, sure. So it's better than nothing. However, I much prefer personally a shot where the composition itself is changing. And Spielberg is the king of this. Spielberg is the king of the reframing, right? Where he gets a close-up and he gets a medium and maybe whatever, gets an insert shot, gets a wide shot, gets multiple different shots within the same shot without cutting.
Hello?
Liza? Toodles?
That is economy. That is elegant, simple filmmaking. And usually, you're probably not going to notice it unless you're looking for it. This is serving the story so well that it becomes invisible. But of course, Spielberg isn't the only director to do this kind of shot. Look at this great shot from this excellent film, directed by Martin Campbell. We've already had two different distinct compositions.
I remember last time I
Then
saw
we
you
move again.
in the square.
The blocking takes us into a new shot, a two-shot.
Do not forget, you were the greatest swordsman.
The blocking takes us into yet another shot where one character's out of focus.
Rafael Montero was the governor of California.
And then we get a nice, swift, decisive rack focus, and now it's an over-the-shoulder shot. Really clever directors can also use mirrors to open up a scene or to create a sense of a character being sort of like boxed in, you know, hit on two sides of an argument or whatever, or to implicate the audience in the character's voyeurism, for example. You can make the characters feel like they're a part of their environment in a more kind of like mythic, natural sense. You can imply how one character is trapping another one, right? You can also have really evocative blocking where the characters are not moving naturally, right? Like it's almost like the character's movements are itself part of the stylization of the movie. It's not just like, oh, the camera does a really stylized move, but it's like the characters, the people are stylized. This is a kind of like surrealism of the human body, you know? Musicals always do this, right? Because like people don't naturally move that way. The musical exists in this sort of like heightened reality that's kind of one step away from our daily real world. But some movies have their actors move as though they're in a musical, even if it's not a musical, just to create this sort of heightened, maybe you might say theatrical sense of reality. And when you have a wider shot, what this also lets you is to not have movement, because the lack of movement, the lack of the camera following a character when they go into another room is itself extremely bold as a choice, right? And it gives you this sense of the continuity of the space, and you know that the camera has really settled into a particular composition. Because at the end of the day, what mise-en-scène is really about is creating evocative, meaningful, and memorable compositions where every object and every character within that frame has a relationship to each other, so that the one image in itself is pregnant with meaning and emotional power. And it doesn't mean that you don't use medium or close-up shots, right? Like, my favorite example is Apocalypse Now for this. Coppola uses tons of mediums and close-ups in that movie, but he will constantly cut back to these wider, more interesting shots that last a little bit longer and that contextualize the characters within this surreal landscape. And something else that Coppola's really good at is letting a character be out of focus. You don't need to cut to another shot, a medium. Just let them be out of focus. So that it feels less just like this personal drama between these individuals. And it starts to feel more like a mythical, eternal story. Something that resonates with an archetypal significance. Compositions communicate something. Symmetry might communicate a spiritual state of wholeness. Depth might communicate a questioning mind looking for more answers. A tracking shot might communicate an inescapable fate. You know, there's a fatalism to this. We are moving constantly forward towards that end. A medium shot, a single shot of a person that's focusing upon their face, does not allow, usually, for this kind of expressive meaning within the grammar of the filmmaking itself. In ages past, 10 or 15 years ago, it was widely understood that the director's job was designing shots and orchestrating the mise-en-scène within a scene. That was the main thing directors did on set. But now my question is, if you're not doing that, then what is the point of a director? Is it just sort of like a way that they work with the art department or something to create a particular vibe? That's cool, but that's a small portion of what your job is. So this is my humble plea to directors, both, up and coming directors who are trying to make a name for themselves, but also, you people in the industry who are running this show, who are making these movies. Do your job, or give it to me and let me do it for you. And those are your only two options. Do not like this video. Do not subscribe to me. Hey, if you're a writer of any kind and you want notes on your writing, please check out my website linked in the description of this video. I give excellent notes at reasonable prices. Thanks so much. Have a good day.